was a bracelet emblazoned with the bold letters WWJD, which signified to the world the devotion of the one who wore it. Now, I realize that we're not exactly a bastion of Bible thumpers here, but do any of you remember what those letters stood for?
What would Jesus do?
What would Jesus do? Oh, thank God, Jesus, they do love you here. That's right. What would Jesus do? Now, I remember all of this quite vividly because I had at least one of these bracelets in every color, sometimes wearing more than one WWJD bracelet as if to double my devotion. It was the accessory of the year, I'm sure of it, my junior year of high school. And if a classmate wasn't wearing their faith on their sleeve, we'd silently wonder whether they had gone to backsliding. What would Jesus do? It's a question that still echoes in my mind frequently to this day. But as a friend of mine used to say, when you ask WWJD, just remember, you can't rule out things like turning over tables and tossing out the money changers. Jesus did some pretty unpredictable things. That is, after all, why Jesus is being interrogated by every religious authority of his day, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees, and now this expert, a lawyer, here in the 22nd chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Jesus has upset business as usual, and they demand, on what authority? What nerve? What right have you to do these things? What would Jesus do? You never could quite tell. More often these days, that question takes a slightly different form for me. More often, the prayer that bubbles up as I mull over my options is this: God, what do you want me to do? How many of you, I wonder, have asked this or a similar question? We could do almost anything, it would seem, if we just knew what it was that God wanted us to do, right? There have been times in my life where this has been a most agonizing and pressing question. Well, like when I was a senior in high school and found myself quite literally at a crossroads. I was on my way to school early one spring morning, and there were at least two routes from which to choose. My hand on the wheel and that WWJD bracelet on my wrist, I had a decision to make. The expedient way merging onto the interstate, or meander through the back roads to school. You see, I had been struggling for months with a big, life-changing decision. Should I venture off to college some 10 hours away in Birmingham? Or, and try not to laugh, should I stick around to make a career out of the fledgling rock and roll band I had been playing with for the past 3 years? Serious stuff. I do laugh a bit about it now, but back then it was a monumental decision. You see, I was the junior member of our little musical gig. The other three were all at least a year older than me, which is kind of a big deal when you're in high school. This band had already been together for nearly 2 years when the three of them graduated from high school, and we came to a crossroads. Two of them the drummer and the guitarist, stuck around and enrolled in the local community college to show their devotion to the band. They were going to stick it out. But my dear friend Todd, the lead singer, the dramatic one, right? The songwriter, he had abandoned the band to go away to college. In the semester that he was away, the band languished. However, hope springs eternal. While he was back home for a lengthy Christmas break and a January term, 6 weeks, the band got back together. We were offered an opening gig for a band that had already, in our eyes, made it to the big time. And we hurriedly recorded a demo tape. 2 songs on side A and 2 songs on side B. And amazingly, it had seen airtime on a local Christian radio station. Driving around town one afternoon, I nearly had a wreck the first time I heard one of our songs on the radio. We were invited to go on a short tour with this older, wiser band, better band, and we all began to wonder, maybe there's something to this. Now, Todd's decision to come back and commit to the band was a big deal. So, in February of my senior year in high school, we all took a road trip in his mom's Ford Aerostar, that minivan that took its design inspiration from a dustbuster, to retrieve his belongings that he had left because he intended to return to college here in Birmingham. Todd was coming home and the band was getting back together for good. But there was a problem. And it confronted me on that road trip to Birmingham. The problem was this. I loved it here. All of it. I loved the college campus. I loved the hills and the fact that they actually had winter here and seasons. I loved the sweet tea so much, I took 3 gallons of Milos home with me. I had Dreamland smoked ribs, and I loved the idea of staying up late reading and discussing new and exciting ideas. I knew immediately that that was exactly where I wanted to go to college. But again, there was only one problem. I couldn't tell the guys. And so the next several weeks and months went by as I vacillated back and forth whether I should make the move to college or stay at home and stick with the band. At the time, and even in retrospect, it was a major life decision. And so that morning, on the way to school, I was agonizing over that very question when I looked down at my WWJD bracelet and thought, God, what is it that you want me to do? And I saw as clear as day those 2 routes laid out before me, and that I was going to have to make a decision. What do you want to do? God seemed to be saying to me. You can go either way, and whichever path you choose, I will be with you. Every time in my life when I have asked God this question, what do you want me to do? The response is very nearly the same. Every time God questions my question, and I'm confronted with the quandary, what do I want to do? Well, blimey, I thought to myself. Actually, I didn't say blimey, it's just the Harry Potter thing I love. That is a hard question. What God wants us to do is sometimes the easy part. What God desires, pure and simple, is our love. What God wants is for us to to love with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, all that we have, and to love one another, to love our neighbor. It is as simple and as difficult as that. That much is clear. That is the summary, the fulfillment, the Cliff Notes version of all of the law and the prophets, Jesus says. You want to know what God wants you to do? Love God. Love your neighbor. The rest, as they say, is commentary. But what this love looks like in your life and in mine, this is where things get complicated. Discernment can be difficult, right? At least part of what it means to love God with all our minds is that we get a say in the matter. We take part in deciding what our love of God, we take part in deciding what our love of neighbor might look like. St. Augustine once said that this commandment could be phrased this way. He said, "Love God and then do whatsoever you desire." That our desire is determined by our love for God. Love God and then do whatsoever you desire. Love God first and foremost above all else, and everything else will fall into place. So discernment is difficult, but discernment is requisite to living life with intention. And I have found that at All Saints in particular, and the Episcopal Church in general, we do not shy away from difficult questions. In fact, we've come to expect rigorous engagement of all our senses as we discern what love of God and love of neighbor will look like here. We are not afraid to ask difficult questions of the Bible, of God, and of one another. We ask difficult questions this time of year like, how much am I willing to give of my time? How much am I willing to give of my money to support this community that nurtures myself, one another, our community, to reach out to those who need a spiritual home? We ask those difficult questions because those are the questions that make us grow. They challenge us to reach out beyond ourselves, beyond what we think is possible, to know that with God, all things are possible. To imagine God's kingdom breaking into our ordinary lives. Now is not a time for timid, tepid faith. And I'll tell you, I am not a Christian because I think it's particularly easy or comfortable. There are days, to be honest, I'd really rather not bother with Jesus in this challenging path of discipleship. I can think of easier ways to mind my own business and go about attending to my own self-preservation. But I have experienced just enough of faith to know that when God questions my questions and I pay attention, when God questions my questions and I am put in a place of vulnerability and introspection, that is a place of fertile growth, new life, new opportunities, and new relationships that ultimately bear the fruit of peace and joy. Resurrection does not happen without first asking some difficult questions. Now you'll notice that at the end of our gospel reading today, it says that all of Jesus' interrogators drift away. They leave him alone. and no one dared ask him any more questions. But if you keep on reading, if you stick with the story, you will learn that the disciples keep asking Jesus questions. A disciple of Jesus keeps on asking the hard questions and sticks with it when God asks a hard question in return. And so this week I commend to all of you, to your contemplation, what might God be calling you to do? And what is it that you most desire? God and your neighbor are longing to know.